Good morning and happy Wednesday, everyone. Welcome to our third day of Financial Literacy Week. Today, we are talking about planning for your financial future. I am personally so excited about the content that we are going to be discussing all day today. Today is all about setting those long-term financial goals. We'll talk about retirement planning this evening at our 6 o'clock workshop. Here in just a little while at 12, we're going to be talking about how to leave a financial legacy for our children and beyond, maybe even, grandchildren, future generations. But this morning, we are here to talk about something a little bit more specific, and that is saving for higher education. We're going to dig into a couple of great vehicles that you might consider if you are thinking about saving for higher education. When I say higher education, that doesn't necessarily mean college, but it may include college. And specifically, we're going to be discussing an option today called the 529 plan. So if you're familiar with that, if you've heard of it, drop us a note in the chat. We want to make sure this is an interactive, participative conversation with you all here this morning. My name is Blaine Cowart. I am the Vice President of Homeowner Services here at Dallas Area Habitat for Humanity. It is my great pleasure to lead our homeowner services team. And we have Christian Marquez with us as well, one of our homeownership counselors. Hey, Christian.
Hey, Blaine. Good morning, everyone. Thank you guys for joining.
Good morning. Good morning. If you know Christian, give us a shout in the chat. Maybe he's your counselor, maybe he's working with you. Give him a shout out in the chat box. So today we're going to be talking about what is encompassed in a 529 plan, why you might consider opening a 529 plan, especially if you're a parent, and hopefully we can get all of your questions answered. Today's session, like I said, hopefully will be interactive. We want to hear from you. So we hope that you have questions on this topic. If you do, please drop those questions either in the chat box or use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. And Christian and I will get to as many of your questions today as we possibly can. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with y'all. Okay. Okay. Can you see my screen? Good. Awesome. Okay. Wonderful. We will get started. Okay. So what exactly is a 529 plan? If you've heard of a 529, again, tell us in the chat box, or if you haven't heard of it, this is brand new information. I'd love to know kind of who we have in our session today in terms of what you guys know on this topic. So a 529 plan is named 529 because it's named after the section of the IRS tax code that has to deal with what we're going to be talking about today, and that is section 529. Essentially, this is a very specialized savings account that you can use to save money for education. That may include college. It may include other options. We're going to dig into that a little bit later in the presentation today. Also, 529 plans provide families with a lot of tax and financial aid advantages. So we're going to dig into why you might consider utilizing this vehicle versus just putting that money in, for instance, a generic savings account or some other type of savings vehicle. And lastly, when we talk about a 529 plan today, it's important to note this is an investment tool. So again, not just a generic savings account that'll earn you just a bit of interest, a couple percentage points. 529 plan is going to allow you to be able to invest your money into a variety of different investment options. And when we talk about investing, we are talking about growing our money. We're talking about leveraging the power of compound interest to be able to take what we have, grow it over time, utilizing the advantage of time itself, right? So like any other kind of investment tools that we'll dig into all day today, it's best to start these things early as possible, because time will be in your favor the earlier you begin. Okay, so there's two different types of 529 plans that are important to understand kind of this difference before you dig into determining whether this might be a good option for you to consider. The more popular and and sort of broader vehicle, if you will, for the type of 529 savings plan is the college savings plan. So a college saving plan 529 is very similar to a Roth IRA or a Roth 401k, where you invest your after-tax contributions essentially in mutual funds. Okay, so you're spreading that out among a variety of different options sort of to mitigate your risk. Of course, because again, we're talking about an investment vehicle here, the money that you invest in a 529 plan and your overall balance at any given time will fluctuate. It will go up, it will go down based on the value, based on how your investments are performing at that point in time. If the stock market is doing well, or if you know, we're experiencing some tougher times like we have here recently with COVID. The second option of 529 plans are what are called prepaid tuition plans. And these are just what they sound like. Essentially, you are prepaying tuition for the beneficiary of your 529 plan. I will say, even though this is a type of 529 plan, it's a lot less common than the college savings plan, because you better know where you're going or where the beneficiary is going to college if you're going to prepay that tuition, right? So maybe, you know, if you're in a legacy family where everyone goes to, you know, whether it's whatever school, Texas Tech, UT, A&M, you know, we've got a lot of these big schools where legacy is a real big thing for families, then maybe, you know, you're interested in prepaying. The benefit of prepaid tuition plans, of course, is that you're going to lock in today's tuition rate. Okay, so even if your beneficiary, let's say your beneficiary is a child that's just a very young child, may not be going to college for, you know, 15 to 18 years from now, you can lock in today's tuition rate and they'll pay that versus whatever it might cost for them in the future. And as we know, you know, over the last several decades, the cost of going to college has become so exorbitant that I bet, you know, a lot of us wish, hey, I wish I could have had tuition rates from 20 years ago. That would be really nice. But of course, you know, the drawback to that type of plan is you have to know where that beneficiary is going to go to college. And that's really tough to know. So because of that, the college savings plan offers you a lot more flexibility. You're not locked into any given school. And like I mentioned earlier, you're not even necessarily locked into going to college. There's various forms of higher education that can be funded with a 529 plan. Okay, so who's involved in a 529 plan? Basically, two important people to note. When you set up a 529 plan, you need an account owner, and you need one beneficiary for that account. Your account owner is going to control the investments and they select who the beneficiary is. And it is worth noting that could be one and the same. Okay, so I can set up a 529 plan for myself. I can be the account holder and the beneficiary of that account. So just know that. Okay, what can 529 plans be used for? A wide variety of things. So on this chart, we're going to get into detail about what can and cannot be used. So first of all, tuition and fees, probably the most straightforward, right? So when we talk about higher education, the first thing that comes to mind for a lot of people is college and college tuition. Again, the amount of college tuition right now is sky high. It can be really cost prohibitive for those of us, you know, thinking of going to college or thinking of going back to college. With 529 plans, it is what is considered a qualified education expense, meaning as long as, you know, you utilize the money in your 529 account for this type of specific expense, then you will reap the tax benefits and not have to deal with any penalties. And we'll get into what those penalties are, you know, here in a second, so you can make sure you're proactive in avoiding those. So tuition and fees, yes, that is eligible. Also worth noting that not just for higher education, but a 529 plan can also be utilized for K through 12 tuition, specifically for private education. So if you're a parent and you're thinking about maybe enrolling your child in private education and would like to utilize the benefits of an investment option to be able to fund that education, you might think about a 529 plan for that. It is worth noting, as you'll see here on the screen, that for K through 12 tuition, it is limited to $10,000 a year. Okay, you do not have those same limitations for post-secondary education. Books and supplies, as long as those books and supplies are utilized for courses in which you're enrolled or the education that you're taking, then those are considered a qualified education expense. Computers and internet access, same thing, right? So not just for tuition itself, right? But also for these other things that can be really expensive. I remember in college, buying books is a huge investment, especially if you can't resell those books. And that's a big investment that you're making up front. So this is stuff, again, that you can tap into this plan for. Room and board. If you or your beneficiary is planning to live on campus at a college or university, that would be considered a qualified educational expense as long as they're enrolled at least as a part-time student or more. Special needs equipment, also an eligible expense. Let's talk about transportation. Transportation and travel costs, like to and from your university, for instance, like if you had to fly from where you live, if you're going out of state, for instance, or driving to university, those are not considered a qualified educational expense that you can utilize that money from your 529 plan for. Neither is health insurance. That's not considered a qualified educational expense. College applications are not included in this, nor are extracurricular activities. But here's a great thing to note at the very bottom, our last item on this table, student loans. So think about this. Let's say that you've already gone to college and you've already incurred student loans and you're thinking, Blaine, this is great info. I wish I would have known this though 10 years ago before I incurred all of the student loan debt. Well, good news is with the 529 plan, you can utilize this funding to pay towards your student loans. There is a lifetime limit of $10,000 for that, but that can be a great opportunity to chop away at some of that debt for sure. Okay, so what if the beneficiary of my account chooses to not go to college? I feel like this is one of the most common questions when it comes to 529 plans. So let's think about this. If, for instance, I'll use myself as an example. I have a baby who's under 1 year old. And so we're already thinking about how are we going to save for his higher education? Again, tuition is so expensive, right? So we need time to work in our favor for this. But the highest risk, of course, thinking through this is, what if our child decides that higher education is not for them? What if they decide that they don't want to go to college? What if he gets a full ride scholarship, for instance, and doesn't need to pay tuition, right? So I feel like this is the number one concern that people have is I don't want to, waste that money or invest it for it not to be utilized in the way that I intended down the road. So here's the good news for you. If you have that question, 529 plan funding does not need to necessarily be used towards college only. Also, a few years back, legislation was updated to be able to include trade and vocational schools. Okay, so when we think about, like, for instance, mechanics, welding, apprenticeship programs, all of that now is included and considered a qualified eligible expense for 529 plans. So really, it's pretty broad. If your beneficiary, if you think that there is a chance that your beneficiary will go to any kind of post-secondary programming, whether it's, again, trade vocational or something like a college or university, community college, whatever the case might be, those would all be considered qualified eligible expenses. So this is a great benefit for you to be thinking about. Also know, if you needed to, you can change the beneficiary. So let's say, again, that, let's say in my example, I start saving real young for my son. And at the time that he turns, 16, 17, it's clear he's getting a full ride scholarship for something. And so we're celebrating, but we're also thinking, man, we've been saving for 16 years towards his college education. Now, what are we going to do with that funding? Well, let's say that we have another child, for instance. We can change that beneficiary to another child. In fact, you can change that beneficiary to any individual who is considered a family member. And I will say, y'all, the IRS is incredibly generous with how they classify family member. So let's say that my son's a only child, for instance. I can change that beneficiary to a niece, a nephew, a brother, a sister, my mom, my dad. I can change it to myself. Remember, I can be the account owner and I can be the beneficiary. So there's never really a big concern about, that money is going to go completely to waste. Chances are you're going to be able to help somebody achieve that goal. Hopefully it's the beneficiary you intended it for, but sometimes life throws us curveballs and things that we aren't expecting. And so luckily the IRS gives us some latitude, some flexibility here on how we can utilize that. As a last resort, here's the other thing. Let's say that your beneficiary, for whatever reason, cannot utilize the funding that you've saved for them in the 529 plan, and you don't know anyone else. Let's say you don't have anybody else that you're interested in funding that opportunity for with that funding. You can withdraw that funding. That money is still yours. Just recognize, think of this kind of similarly to those of you who might be contributing to a 401k, right? Think about with a 401k, if we utilize that money that we have set aside specifically for retirement for something other than retirement, what happens? We get penalized, right? We pay a penalty fee. So same thing with this. 529 plans are structured somewhat similarly to something like again, like a Roth IRA, a retirement planning vehicle, to where it's used for a very specific purpose, right? So in the case of 529s, if you're withdrawing that money and you're using it for just for funding for yourself and you're not going to fund anything educational related, you are going to pay a penalty for doing that. And that penalty is a 10% penalty on the amount of money that you're withdrawing, plus you would pay tax on any earnings. Again, this is an investment vehicle, right? And so presumably you've earned on that money over time, and you will pay tax on that money once you withdraw it, at the moment that you withdraw it. And this is only, remember, this is only if you're withdrawing for a non-qualified expense, okay? This does not apply. You're not going to pay tax on this if you're actually utilizing this for the purpose that it was created for, which is funding education. And we did talk already about how you can utilize this as well for K through 12 tuition, and additionally for student loan repayments. Okay, so let's dig into specifically some of the benefits. And really, this could be a very long slide because there are so many benefits to 529 plans. I really strongly encourage any parents who are on today's call, no matter what the age of your child is, if you're thinking about trying to support them with funding their education in part, this is a great way to do this. So many benefits to these plans. First of all, having a 529 plan, opening a 529 plan makes it so incredibly easy to save. There is so much data out there around how when we make our savings automatic and something that we do not have to think about, the chances that we attain our financial goals are extremely higher than they would be otherwise. And so this is a great way to do that. Just like any other kind of savings vehicle with your 529 plan, you can, and I strongly recommend that you do, set up automatic withdrawal from your paycheck, making sure that money comes straight out. Also, this is a great way to encourage grandparents, maybe aunts and uncles, friends, whomever, to be able to gift money to the beneficiary. Let's assume that beneficiary is a child for the case of that example, right? If my child's a beneficiary, maybe for his birthday, you know, I ask grandparents, in lieu of a gift, in lieu of a toy, would you be willing to fund something towards his education? And you'd be surprised, y'all. A lot of these 529 plans now have some really wonderful and easy to use websites, gift cards, so you can make it feel special. It's not just like a ghost donation into an account that's nothing tangible. They make it really special, something that you can gift that beneficiary that you know, makes them know that you've contributed for their education. Also, a huge benefit of a 529 plan is that you can open this type of account at any time. Okay, there's no age limit. Just like there's no age limit in terms of when you can go back to education and reap the benefits of a degree. There's no limit as far as you know, a cap on age, anything like that, for opening up a 529 plan. So no matter how old you are, again, maybe you are, let's say maybe you're a grandparent and you've established this account for a beneficiary who's a grandchild of yours. And let's say that something changes and that grandchild chooses not to pursue higher education and doesn't have any qualifying expenses. You do have the opportunity, again, if you say, you know what, I'd like to go back to school, I'd like to enroll in a program, you're able to do that, no age limit. Third benefit that I want to talk about is the account owner, again, remember you have an account owner and a beneficiary. The account owner owns the account, not the child. This is distinct from some of the other savings options that we'll talk about briefly today in today's presentation. So you own, as the account owner, the account, and you have the opportunity to change that beneficiary, again, if they don't pursue higher education. With some of the other options that we'll talk about today, specifically custodial accounts, which is probably the other most popular option that families choose for saving for higher education, you do not have that option of changing a beneficiary. So this is a really big benefit for 529 plans specifically. And lastly, again, anyone can contribute, not necessarily just you as the account owner, but friends, family, whoever can gift towards that account. Lastly, and most importantly, there are so many incredible tax benefits to 529 plans. Number one, your contributions that you make to this savings vehicle are after tax. So that's number one. Number two, your earnings are going to accumulate on a tax deferred basis, meaning you don't pay taxes on that as you're making deposits over time into your account. Okay. And then qualified distributions from a 529 plan, again, qualified, right? So we went through earlier what those qualified expenses are, things like tuition, books, computer equipment, right? That type of thing, K through 12 tuition, student loans. Those qualified distributions are entirely tax-free, okay? So meaning when you go to pull that money out, you don't have to pay taxes on it. How nice is that? Okay, so now you've saved that money tax-free, just like, again, if you're utilizing a savings vehicle like a 401k, there's a lot of similarities there. So this is hugely beneficial if you think that there's any chance whatsoever that you might be interested in helping fund higher education for a beneficiary or multiple beneficiaries. This is definitely an option that you want to make sure that you look into. Okay, so how to choose a 529 plan that works for you. So here's how it works, y'all. The 529 plans are generally run by the states, by different states, and you do not have to pick the plan of your state. So if you live here in Texas, like Christian and I do, you don't have to go with Texas's 529 plan. You can go with any state's 529 plan. Now we'll say some of the plans have a distinct difference in terms of an income tax benefit. About 35, I think 35 states plus DC, something like that, offer this benefit. But again, assuming most of our attendees today here are in Texas, like we are, then that is not going to affect you, right? Because we don't pay income tax here in Texas. But if you lived in a state that did pay income tax, know that there's also benefits for you in using a 529 plan in that regard as well. 529 plans, these are investment options. So they do have fees that are run behind the scene. Make sure that you do your research and understanding, what the fees are associated with the plans that you're looking at. And of course, look for the plan that has the lowest fees. What are you actually investing in a 529 plan? So we talked earlier that you're really investing in a wide variety of things, or you can invest in a wide variety of things depending on your plan. Again, when you select your plan, you'll be able to select the types of things that you're investing in based on your risk appetite, right? And so the types of things that are an opportunity for you to invest in a 529 include things like stocks, both US and international stocks, real estate funds, bond funds, money market accounts, okay, so which are pretty broad, right, and encompassing a lot of different options there, and cash. Some 529 plans offer the opportunity for you to invest in bank CDs as well. So lots of different options, but again, just like any other investment tool, you want to really analyze what is your risk appetite for this, and then based on what that is, and also not even necessarily just your risk appetite, but think about how old is your beneficiary. Are you starting when your beneficiary is super young, like, my son who's just a baby? Or are we thinking about this, but maybe our beneficiary is 15, 16 years old and realistically would be utilizing this pretty soon, right? So generally speaking, when it comes to risk mitigation for investment options, the longer term your goal is, the riskier, most of us will be willing to be. the closer we get to wanting to utilize that funding, the more conservative generally we're going to get with investment options. And that certainly holds true for 529 plans as well. And just like a lot of different retirement options, you do have the opportunity with certain 529 plans to utilize what's called a dynamic investment option. And what that means is that you do not need to feel intimidated as the account owner. And this is what I want you to know. If you're thinking about opening an account, you're thinking, but Blaine, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know anything about investing in this, and I don't want to invest my money into something that I don't really understand. What if I lose money because I don't know what I'm doing? You do not have to worry about that. When you're investing in these plans, especially something like a dynamic investment option, it will auto adjust for you. So you set these determinations at the beginning when you set your plan up, and then over time, you set it and forget it, y'all. It's very easy. Okay. So for instance, one example of this is an age-based asset allocation, meaning you can set up that trajectory like we just talked about, right? Let's say that you anticipate you have 15 years from the time that you set up your 529 plan to the time that you anticipate that your beneficiary is going to be wanting to utilize that money. Then you can set up an age-based asset allocation that's going to adjust over time for you to make sure that the closer your beneficiary gets to that age of maturity, and the likelihood that they're going to dip into that funding, we want to make sure the most amount of that funding is there for them, no matter what the market conditions are like at that time. And also lastly, as you're shopping around for 529 plans, we suggest that you compare 529 plans based on their net performance after subtracting the fees. And I'll tell you, there is a really incredible resource that I highly recommend that you check out. This is a resource that we suggest and that most financial advisors would certainly suggest that you check out as well. And that website is savingforcollege.com. You're going to see that link on your screen, and we can drop it in the chat for you as well. But savingforcollege.com is going to allow you to go on and learn more in detail about 529 plans, maybe answer any more very specific questions that you may have about these plans and how they work. But then also you can compare plans across the board. And so if you're thinking about like, well, let me see how Texas stacks up against this other plan, for instance, you can go on and compare those plans side by side. It makes it super simple, very easy. So highly, highly, highly suggest that you check that out if you're thinking about these plans. Okay, so I mentioned earlier, 529 plans are not the only way that we can save for higher education, and not even necessarily just for higher education. Maybe we just want to set up some money for our children to be able to utilize once they reach the age of 18, or older, whatever that may be, maybe 21. And so another great option that I want to share with you all today is something called a custodial account. When you do your research on custodial accounts, you might hear them referred to by these acronyms that you see on the screen, a UGMA or a UTMA, okay? And so just know that custodial accounts, the main difference is that custodial accounts, the money that you save in that type of savings vehicle for your beneficiary, can be used for higher education, but does not necessarily need to be used for higher education. So let's say, for instance, you think, well, I want to save money for my children one day to be able to utilize if they wish to go to school, or maybe when they graduate, maybe they're super entrepreneurial and want to start a business, for instance. Maybe they're going to opt not to take advantage of higher education. Or maybe they want to pursue something that they're really passionate about. Maybe they are into the arts or humanities, something that, maybe they could use some money for, right? Custodial accounts are going to allow them to do that. If you're here thinking, no, Blaine, I want to fund education and education only, then a custodial account probably isn't for you, right? 529 would probably be more up your alley. Because custodial accounts are going to give your beneficiary latitude and what they can utilize that money for. So it really boils down to really understanding your beneficiary, understanding your goals of why you want to be saving this money and what you want it to be ideally utilized for, and how sort of strict, if you will, you are on how you want that money to be allocated one day. So custodial accounts, basically the way that it works is it allows adults to save and invest. Again, this is an investment vehicle. Okay, so not different from just putting this money into a general savings account. And you're investing on behalf of a minor until they reach an age of maturity that's pre-specified, right? It may be 18, it may be 21 years of age. And at that point in time, the money entirely is transferred to them. So basically, until they reach that age of maturity, you as the account holder are acting as the custodian for that money, but that money is not your money. It is your beneficiary's money. Okay, that's a distinct difference with the 529 plan. When you're the account owner, you're managing that money and that money belongs to you. Remember, because you can change that beneficiary at any given time. That cannot be done with a custodial account. Okay, so before you think about what option is best for you, you want to sit down and think about what your goals are for some of this. Note that because you're acting as a custodian for this account, and again, the money is not yours, but that of your beneficiary, these gifts that are contributed over time, whether it's you contributing or family members, friends, whomever, those gifts are considered irrevocable. Okay, so they cannot be taken back at any point in time. They are a gift for the beneficiary. And when that beneficiary reaches the age of maturity, the money is theirs. So you want to think about that, before you go down that route. And also, again, you don't have the option of saying, okay, my beneficiary is 17 and I'm seeing this is not going to go well if he or she runs into a whole bunch of money that we've saved for the last 17 years based on, what they're doing in life at this point in time. That's a decision we have to make early. So you want to make sure you put a lot of thought into this. And we would really suggest to sort of tag on to what we talked about yesterday with youth and financial education. This is, y'all, why this is so important to be talking with our kids about money, helping them understand why it's so important to manage that properly. A couple of drawbacks. Again, the assets are considered owned by the child. This can impact financial aid. This is an important consideration to note. When you apply with the FAFSA for financial aid, custodial account, funds that are in a custodial account are considered those of the beneficiary, of the child. Those are a child's assets, unlike a 529 plan. And I will say with the FAFSA specifically, children's assets, students' assets are weighed more heavily than parents' assets. Meaning, if the money is in a custodial account, there is a chance that your child could qualify for less money in financial aid than if you went the 529 route. Okay, so just an important consideration to know. Just a couple of resources as we wrap up today. We mentioned savingforcollege.com. Also, I want to let you all know that we have on our self-guided financial education platform that's called PocketWise, we do have a module specifically on 529 plans, and we have an entire playlist on there with multiple modules on saving for higher education that'll walk through some of what we discussed today in more detail, including some calculators that you can go online and play with as well. So without further ado, I want to open us up for a Q&A session if we have any questions from the audience. Monica asked a question. I suspect Monica asked this question just before I answered Monica, but yes, thank you for putting that in the chat. Monica asked, will having a 529 plan affect my child's chance of qualifying for financial education? Yes, so like we just discussed, it does affect, meaning it is accounted for in the FAFSA, but it is more favorable. It is looked upon more favorably in the FAFSA to have a 529 plan versus a custodial account, since that money does not belong to the child, to the student in a 529 plan. So thanks, Monica, for asking that question.
Hey, Blaine, we have another question. Someone wrote, if you move out of state down the line, how does that affect the 529 plan?
Thank you for pointing that question out. That's a great question. Actually, that has no effect. Remember, you do not have to live in the state that you're utilizing the plan for. So meaning I can live, like for instance, I live in Texas, but I will say, we're not advertising any plans in particular, but I will tell you, if you go online and do your research, Ohio's plan is very popular. It's a very popular plan. It has very low fees. It tends to perform very well. And so I live in Texas. I can use that plan. If I move to California, I can still use that plan. So it's a great question. No impact whatsoever. Elizabeth, you are welcome. Thank you for taking the time today and joining us. Quite certainly. What other questions do we have? Any other questions? I will say, well, if you have questions, send them in the chat. Otherwise, I'll let everyone know our next session today that we have is going to be at noon. This is going to be a really incredible session. I really hope that you guys can join us for it. We are talking about leaving a financial legacy, and we are bringing on Lauren Smith, who is a certified financial planner and a business owner here locally, who's going to come and talk to us about how we can be intentional in setting up our future generations for success. So we'll talk a little bit about, briefly on some of what we touched on this morning, but then we're going to dig more into also estate planning, wills, trusts, how we protect, not just set up our children for success and future generations, but then how we protect that money as well. So be sure to join us. And like I mentioned earlier, this evening at 6 o'clock, we are bringing on our partners at NFP, who are going to be discussing all things retirement in our Roadmap to Retirement workshop tonight. Oh, I see another question. I'll get to this. Let's see. Raquel, thank you for sending this in. Raquel asks, how aggressive should one be when selecting the investment option for a person a few months out or 5 years out? I think that's a great question, Raquel. Honestly, this is a personal decision, to be very honest with you. Just like anything else with investment, making decisions, this is going to be based on your personal risk appetite. So, no one has a crystal ball, right, to know exactly what's going to happen over the next 5 years and how your investments could perform. It could be the case that the stock market takes off over the next 5 years and what you invest now grows exponentially over the next 5 years. And it was the best decision you made, right? Contrarily, there was a lot of folks I know that, were right on the cusp of, maybe retirement or entering the age for higher education just when COVID hit. The market tanked and they were like, oh, okay, I was really hoping to do this now, but it's not a good time for the market, right? So there's always some unknown factors in the market. Generally speaking, in general, we would say, as you get closer to your goal, you want to be more conservative, right? But 5 years is still a decent amount of time, Raquel, is what I would say. It's a lot different than, 1 year out. So there's still time. Remember that, when it comes to things, all things investing, not just 529 plans, but this goes for retirement as well. There will be fluctuations. There's going to be ups and downs. The worst thing that you can do when it comes to investing is become scared when you see that value dip, okay? And pull out then. That's the worst thing you can do. You always want to ride out the storm. There's going to be downs, but there's also going to be some incredible ups. So you want to make sure that you're in it for the long haul. 5 years is a good amount of time, Raquel. And I would say, like I said, it depends on your risk appetite. If you are the type of person that is more willing to say, you know what? I'm willing to take the risk. I'm willing to invest a little bit more heavily and know that I might endure some losses for the next 5 years, but I also might walk away with way more money than I would have if I just stuck this in a savings account, right? Then go for it, is what we would say. And do your research. Again, do your research on the plans. Make sure that you know how well that these plans are performing before you sign up for a plan. Do your research on that and visit savingforcollege.com to be able to do that in more detail. All right, y'all. Well, without any additional questions, we will wrap up today. Thank you all so much for joining. We want to remind everyone that this session and all of our sessions this week are being recorded. They will be available on demand after the event. We've got 2 more days. Tomorrow is our keynote speaker. Tomorrow, Thursday, April the 7th at 12 p.m. We will be here with Bola Sukumbi of Clever Girl Finance. She is incredible. If you don't know her, I promise you, you do not want to miss a session. So hopefully we see you then. Until then, y'all take care. Have a great Wednesday.